I want to continue on a series that I've been discussing with you called The Journey of Man. And this is a series we put together down in Harlingen for a gospel meeting that really included 10 different sermons. And there was a theme that ran through all of those sermons that had to do with Ephesians 3, 9 through 10, that said that the manifold wisdom of God was going to be known by the church. The church has a mission, and it's to make the manifold wisdom of God known throughout this world. And here were the 10 sermons that were lined up: the creation, the fall, restoration, prophecies of Christ, the King is coming, the church, the gospel, death, the day Christ came again, judgment, heaven and hell. And this is where we're currently at this morning. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the prophecies of Christ and that Jesus really is the Messiah. Before I do that, I want to kind of establish the concept of some of what I want to do this morning. If I told you this morning that, and I did this hundreds of years ago, 400 years ago, Fleming was on the earth, and he said there's going to be a time when there's going to be a congregation called College Park Church of Christ, and there's going to be a man that goes to church there. You might be impressed if I got the college name Church of Christ part right. You might not be as impressed if I said a man went to church there, because you would go, well, you got a pretty good broad shot at getting the man part. There's going to be a man that goes to church there. Well, what if I said that man is also a married man? Well, that's going to eliminate some. There are some men in this crowd that are not married, so we start to narrow the field down a little bit. And if I said that 400 years ago, I prophesied there was going to be a man going to the College Park Church of Christ that's married, and this individual is a graduate of Sam Houston State University. Well, that starts to narrow the field down a little bit further. There are others in this room that are graduates of Sam, but you start going, well, it's going to eliminate some others that are not graduates of Sam. And if I said that hundreds of years ago, there was going to be a guy going to College Park Church of Christ that's going to be a married man. He's going to have children. Well, you could have married individuals that graduated from Sam that had children, but you're going to have some that are married men graduated from Sam that didn't have children. So we narrow the field down a little bit more. Who could that man be? What if I said he's got his master's degree? You say, well, there's some in the crowd that have a master's degree from Sam that are married and have children. Who could those individuals be? We start to narrow the field down because there's some here that may be married with children, graduated from Sam, and that have children but don't have a master's degree. Maybe they've got a bachelor's degree or something along those lines. But I'm starting to narrow the field down. You start to figure out there's somebody. I'd be pretty impressed if I said somebody went to College Park Church of Christ, and I prophesied this hundreds of years beforehand, and said that this individual's a married man, he's got children, he graduated from Sam with a master's degree, and he's got a master's degree in business. You start, well, I've really narrowed it down a little bit more, because somebody else might have a master's degree in math, somebody else might have a master's degree in English, somebody might have a master's degree, a lot of different things. But this guy's got a master's degree in business. And what if I said that same individual hundreds of years before drives a red Ford pickup truck? Who am I talking about? Raise your hand if you got a master's in business from Sam and you drive a red Ford pickup truck. Who could it be? I mean, we start to narrow the field down and we come up with, that's Timothy Fleming. And then what if I named him 400 years ago? You'd really be impressed, wouldn't you? You would go, wow. And then you're less impressed with the fact that Timothy's got a master's degree in business from Sam, and you'd be impressed with Ty that 400 years ago he could prophesy that Timothy came to College Park Church of Christ, married, had children, and drives a red pickup truck. Red Ford pickup truck. Notice the specificity. It's got to be a Ford, right? Now, here's the point. That same thing that I just described to you with Timothy happened with Jesus Christ. Hundreds of years before prophecies were fulfilled, hundreds of years before it was prophesied, certain things about Jesus Christ. And I want to walk through some of those with you very quickly this morning. John chapter 20 and verse number 31 says, "These are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name." We're at the end of the book of John, and he said, I've given you all this about the life of Christ, and I could have written a lot of other things. Books could have been written, longer books, lots more books. But we couldn't even contain the things that Jesus did. But these were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that believing you might have life through his name. John chapter 14, verse number 6, Jesus came and said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." So we've got this character, Jesus Christ, that makes this bold proclamation that said, "I am Jesus the Christ, and no one comes to the Father except through him." Through me, as if Jesus were saying those words. That's a pretty bold proclamation. So who is this Jesus? Hebrews 11 and verse number 1 says, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." I've heard it preached from pulpits that faith is hoped for and faith is not seen. That's not what that verse said. That verse said faith is the substance of things hoped for. It is the evidence of things not seen. So when we talk about faith, we're not talking about blind faith. We're talking about faith that's built upon evidence, and some of what I want to do this morning is give you evidence of the fact that Jesus truly is the Messiah. Jesus also made this proclamation in John chapter 5 and verse number 39, "Search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me." The scriptures he was talking about was Old Testament scriptures. If you read through the Old Testament, you're going to see Jesus. When you read through the Old Testament, it's going to help you and guide you and direct you and teach you who Jesus is. And that's what we want to do a little bit of this morning. Hundreds of years beforehand, and can be documented that it was prophesied that a Messiah was coming. The one who was going to make sure that we had access to the Father in heaven. Isaiah 7 and verse number 14 said, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." So hundreds of years before it came to pass, it was prophesied that a virgin was going to conceive a child, and he was going to be the Messiah. He was going to be Emmanuel. And I recognize it takes faith to believe in a virgin birth. I recognize that. But it's faith that's built upon evidence, and I want to give you some of those evidences this morning. In fact, if you look in the Old Testament, they say there are some 62 to 65 major prophecies of the coming Messiah. Now, there are hundreds of what we might call minor prophecies, and I don't mean minor prophets per se, but minor prophecies, meaning incidental prophecies, like Genesis 3:15. For instance, it said, "I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." That would be considered more of a minor prophecy, but there are major prophecies. We're only going to look at about 21 or 22 of them this morning, but one of those major prophecies is the virgin birth. It was prophesied he was going to be born of a virgin. Well, we get to Matthew chapter 1, and we find the fulfillment. This all was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, "Behold, a virgin shall be with child, shall bring forth a son. They shall call his name Emmanuel," which being interpreted is God with us. And this is at the birth of Christ, the record of the birth of Christ. And he is called the Emmanuel. Or he is called Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. A virgin was with child. And it's prophesied hundreds of years beforehand, and we see the fulfillment in New Testament Christianity and New Testament scriptures. There were several other prophecies, but one of the other prophecies was that Jesus was going to be born of David's royal seed. Jeremiah chapter 23 and verse number 25 says, "Behold, the day has come, saith the Lord, I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth." So hundreds of years beforehand, it was prophesied that this Messiah that was going to come was going to be of David's seed, King David's royal seed. And we find a fulfillment of that in Matthew chapter 1 and verse number 1. The book of the generations of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. He was of David's royal seed. It was prophesied where this Messiah was going to be born. Micah chapter 5, verse number 2, O thou Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be a ruler in Israel. His going forth has been from old, from everlasting. Hundreds of years beforehand prophesied who the coming Messiah was going to be, and that coming Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. Matthew chapter 2 and verse number 1, guess what city Jesus was born in? He was born in Bethlehem. And we see the fulfillment of that. It was prophesied he was going to perform miracles. Isaiah 35, verse number 4 through 6, say to them that the fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance, even God with recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped, and then shall the lame man leap as a hart, or as a deer, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing, or the tongue of the person that can't speak shall sing, is prophesied of these coming miracles. Matthew chapter 9 and verse number 35, Jesus healed every sickness and every disease, and he did it among the people. So we find record of this Messiah. Now I want to go to this next list, and there's a couple of things I want to make mention of. Number one, let's talk about a miracle for just a moment. A miracle in Scripture is not sometimes what we call miracles. Sometimes we say, well, that's a miracle. And it's not necessarily a miracle. When we look at that from a scriptural standpoint, we're looking at something that's contrary to the laws of nature, meaning miraculous in that sense. Lisa and Ty years ago had a daughter. She was born to us. And there are people that say childbirth, that's a miracle. Well, actually, it's not a miracle at all. It's amazing, but it's not a miracle. A miracle would be something contrary to the laws of nature. Now, Ty and Lisa came together and we birthed a child, or technically Lisa birthed the child. It's actually very natural. It's not a miracle. It is amazing. It's not a miracle. Here's a miracle. Lisa conceives an ear of corn. That would have been a miracle. Okay? There's a difference between something that's amazing and something that's a miracle. Now, here's part of the challenge that we have in the world we live in today is we've got TV preachers that get on TV and they'll say, you know, I feel right now, put your hand on the TV set or something. I feel right now that somebody out there is getting cured of a headache. Now, think about it for just a moment. This airwaves, this television sermon is going out to millions of people. Somebody's headache is going away while this TV show is going on. Really? That's not a miracle. It's not even really amazing. Okay? Somebody says they're being cured of a neck ache or a back ache or something. Really, out of millions of people, somebody's back ache quit hurting. Not even really that amazing, much less a miracle. So when I talk about miracles, I'm talking about Jesus healed every manner of disease, and he did it among the people. He did it in front of people, and he did it by restoring a withered hand. He did it by putting back on the ear of Malchus with no stitches. That's a miracle and amazing, but that's a miracle. It's not just some generalized whatever that we see in our society around us today. We're very loose with our English language sometimes today. Another thing I want you to notice about these prophecies, there may have been a lot of boys that were born to David's royal seed, and there were. You can look at Matthew chapter 1 and you can see the lineage of Christ, and there were a lot of boys. But you start to narrow the field down when you say, but we're talking about only boys that were born in Bethlehem. And you say, yeah, that's true, but there were still a lot of boys born in Bethlehem that might have been of David's royal seed. And you would be right, but it still narrows it down. And then if you start talking about somebody that did miracles that came out of Bethlehem, who was born of David's royal seed, it starts to really narrow the field down. It starts to get specific, kind of like the Timothy example in this case. This same Messiah was going to be betrayed by a friend. Psalm 41 and verse number 9, my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. And in John 13 and 18, we see the fulfillment of that. He that eateth bread with me hath lifted up his heel against me, in fulfillment of that prophecy. So how many children were born of David's royal seed in the city of Bethlehem that had a friend strike against him? Well, we start to narrow the field. There were boys that were born of David's royal seed that were born in Bethlehem, but how many of those were betrayed by a friend and did miracles? How many were betrayed for 30 pieces of silver? It was prophesied in Zechariah 11 and 12 that Jesus, the Messiah, was going to be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Again, notice the specificity of the prophecy. Not 20 pieces of silver, not 50 pieces of silver, 30 pieces of silver. And guess what? In Matthew 26 and 15, Jesus was betrayed. He agreed with those that would kill Jesus. He covenanted with them for 30 pieces of silver. Again, notice the specificity. We start to narrow the field. Who was it that was born in Bethlehem? Who did miracles? Who was of David's royal seed? Who was betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver? Who was that? We start to narrow the field down, and we can only ultimately come to one conclusion. That same 30 pieces of silver was prophesied hundreds of years before, that it would buy the field of a potter in Zechariah 11 and verse number 13. It took the 30 pieces of silver, cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. And guess what? In Matthew 27, talking of Jesus, talking about the 30 pieces of silver, this same 30 pieces of silver bought with them the potter's field that they buried strangers in fulfillment of that prophecy. This same individual is going to be silent when persecuted. Isaiah 53 and verse number 7 says he was oppressed. He was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shears is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Isaiah 53, a very famous passage, documented hundreds of years before that Christ came. This was the passage that was being read by the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8. Who was it talking about? Jesus. And in Matthew 26, we see fulfillment of this, that when he went through those persecutions, he held his peace. As a lamb, dumb or silent before his shearers, so opened he not his mouth. This individual was going to be mistreated. Isaiah 53 and 3, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Fulfilled in Matthew 27, verse number 26, when they had scourged Jesus, they mistreated Jesus, they delivered him to be crucified. Who could it be? Is it Timothy? Is it Daryl? Is it Jerry? Is it Ty? Who could it be? Let's throw all the human beings of the earth into this equation. Who could it be that was prophesied to be the Messiah? And at the end of this conclusion, that's the reason these prophecies are there, in my opinion, why God so lovingly gave them to us, is we don't have to doubt whether we ought to follow Lao Tzu or whether we ought to follow Muhammad or whether we ought to follow Hinduism or anything else. Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He is the one that we should follow. He was to be spit upon. It was prophesied in Isaiah 50, verse number 6. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. Matthew 26 and 67, they did spit on his face in the New Testament. They were going to mock him. Psalm 22 and verse number 7, all they that see me laugh me to scorn. And we see the fulfillment of that in Matthew 27 and verse number 31. And after that, they had mocked him in fulfillment. All these prophecies, all 62 to 64 of these prophecies, major prophecies, were fulfilled. Hundreds of these prophecies, if you include the minor ones, were fulfilled. We're just dealing with a few of them. Very strong evidence to the fact that Jesus is a Messiah. This same individual was going to pray for his persecutors. Isaiah 53, verse number 12. He made intercession for the transgressors in Isaiah 53. Luke 23, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They were going to gamble for his clothes. Psalm 22, verse number 18. Part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. And we see the fulfillment of that in John 19. They said among themselves, let us not rend it, but cast lots for it. Whose it shall be. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. There are people that would say, well, everything about Jesus is a fraud. Excuse me. Everything about Jesus is a fraud. and that all this was planned out and his disciples had planned it and all this sort of thing. Now I want you to think about this. In a day and age with no computer technology, you know what I can do on a computer nowadays? I can look up what are the prophecies of Christ and I can bring them up. Boom, just like that. Years ago, I lived in Plainview, Texas. This goes back 40 years ago. When I first started doing church work, you know the first thing I bought was for church work? A typewriter. That'll tell you something, guys. Things have changed, right? I owned that typewriter for a long time because we needed a typewriter. Jay Henderson I was working with and training with, and Jay Henderson told me, he said, we need to look up all the passages of Scripture that talk about the soul being within you. And I want you to type those out. I've still got it to this day. And it's just that thick of all the verses. I spent weeks typing out all the verses that had the soul within you. And today I can do that on a computer and bring it up in seconds, right? You've got to get out of the modern framework for a moment and realize that when we talk about prophecies of Christ and you start talking about his disciples, they didn't have computer technology that brought up all of the major prophecies of Christ and all the rather insignificant prophecies of Christ, although I don't think I'd call any of them insignificant, but what we might call minor prophecies of Christ. The reality is there's no way they could have staged this or planned this. Jesus was dead at this point in time, or close to death at this point in time, and his enemies are making the decision of what to do with his garments. Not his disciples, not his loved ones. His enemies are making the decision what to do. They're fulfilling the prophecies of the Messiah. All the more evidence that it truly was the Messiah. He was going to ride into Jerusalem in a red Ford pickup truck or on a donkey. And not only a donkey, but it was going to be a donkey of which never had a man sat. In Zechariah 9 and verse number 9, lowly and riding upon an ass and upon the colt, the foal of an ass. He rode upon a donkey of which never had a man sat before. We find fulfillment of that in Matthew 21. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee meek and sitting upon an ass, the colt, the foal of an ass, in fulfillment of this prophecy in in Zechariah 9 and verse number 9. It was prophesied he was going to thirst, Psalm 69:21. In my thirst, they gave me vinegar to drink. It was prophesied, guess what? John 19, the scripture was fulfilled, which said, I thirst. John 19, as he hung there upon a cross. He's going to be crucified with thieves. The Old Testament said he's going to be numbered with the transgressors in his death. And in Matthew 27 and 38, there were two thieves crucified with him. He was numbered with the transgressors in his death. No bones were going to be broken. Soldiers came up to break his bones to speed up the death process. But it was prophesied that no bones in his body were going to be broken. He keepeth all his bones. Not one of them is broken. And guess what? John 19, the fulfillment. They decided not to break his legs. Now again, you've got the enemies of Jesus fulfilling the prophecies of the coming Messiah. It's impossible that this was fraudulent or some scheme that Jesus and his disciples put forward. It was prophesied hundreds of years before his side was going to be stabbed. Zechariah 12 and verse number 10, whom they had pierced. They were going to pierce him. And John 19:34, but one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side. That's kind of hard to say. It was prophesied they were going to look on him of whom they had pierced. Zechariah 12 and verse number 10. They shall look upon me of whom they had pierced. John 19:37. And again another scripture which saith, they shall look on him of whom they had pierced. Fulfilled all these prophecies. Who could it be? Is it some other person? It'd be impossible to be someone else except the Messiah. And we're talking about documented hundreds of years beforehand prophecies. It was prophesied where he was going to be buried in a rich man's tomb. Isaiah 53 and 9. He made his grave with the wicked, with the rich in his death. And it was Joseph of Arimathea in Matthew 27 and verse number 57. Rich man that laid Jesus in his new hewn tomb. Now, some of you that are here may have burial plans. You may have gone down to a funeral home and said, I want to be buried a certain way. I want to be buried in this spot. There is no guarantee you're going to be buried there. Not saying you won't, maybe you will. I'm just saying there's no guarantee. The plane you're in could blow up over the Atlantic Ocean. They never find enough pieces of your body to put in that grave. There is no guarantee that's where you're going to be. Sorry to be so graphic. But there's no way to guarantee it. My grandmother, bless her heart, beautiful woman, she died at 84 years old, and before she died, she bought a pre-need burial plan. And she wanted to be buried in a cloth-covered pine box. She's a very simple woman. She paid for a simple burial plan. Her kids went in there after she died and talked to the funeral director and said, we're not putting her in a cloth-covered pine box. We're going to buy her an aluminum 26-gauge, whatever casket. She wasn't buried in a cloth-covered pine box. That's what she purchased, but that wasn't what she was buried in. And I guarantee you, I could buy whatever today. I could say I want to be buried in the fanciest coffin known to mankind. I could pay for it, have it prepaid for and everything. There is no guarantee I'm going to be in that thing because Michael's going to be in the room. And he's going to go, he doesn't need a gold-covered whatever oak casket. He doesn't need that, right? Let's save some money, family, for an inheritance. That's what Michael would be doing, okay? But the point is, hundreds of years beforehand, it was prophesied Jesus was going to be buried in a rich man's tomb, and he was laid there. And it was his enemies, essentially, that put him there when it was said and done. There's no way that it could have been a fraud. It was prophesied that he's going to be resurrected from the grave. Psalm 16:10. Again, I recognize the fact that it takes faith to believe in a resurrection. We talked about this summer in our daytime services, the proof of the resurrection, the proof of individuals that witness the resurrection, all that. I'll grant you, but it's faith that's built upon evidence. Thou not leave my soul in hell or in the grave, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. His body's not going to rot in the grave was the prophecy in Psalm 16:10. Fulfillment of that in Acts chapter 2 and verse number 31. His soul was not left in hell, neither would his flesh see corruption, was Peter's sermon after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, of which Peter had witnessed and had seen. In Matthew 28, verse number 1, you remember at the end of the Sabbath as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week came Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, to the sepulchre. And they came and the tomb was empty. Now, you've got to analyze that evidence. And I recognize it's faith built upon evidence. I recognize that. But you've got to analyze that and be honest and say, could it be Muhammad? Could it be Lao Tzu? Could it be some other religious philosopher or leader? Who could it be that fulfilled all of those prophecies? And there's only one conclusion. And we would have to be amazed at the miraculous nature of these prophecies given hundreds of years beforehand that Christ fulfilled. All of them. Well, there is an individual. Y'all understand the concept of statistics. I took a statistics class in college, and it's called Research Design and Statistical Measurement. And the formulas were about this long. It was a fun course to go through. And I'll tell you that if you've not sat in one of those classes, you need to look for a professor that will let you bring the formulas to the test, because it helps tremendously. If they make you memorize the formulas, you've got a job on your hands. But basically, statistics is kind of in politics, if you read the newspaper, I'm dating myself a little, but if you get on and you're reading about the news and they say, they've done a poll and this person is ahead in the race by 8% with a margin of error of 3%. That's statistical measurement. They did not ask everybody in the United States how they're going to vote, and chances are they've not called you. They call 1,000 people, and then they say, based upon statistical analysis, here's what we think is going to happen in the country. They extrapolate it out, and they say our margin of error may be 3%, and so there's room in there to have made a mistake. But the reality is, this is a statistical measurement. We can extrapolate out based upon these 1,000 people that apparently are a random sampling. That's what they tell us, right? So we get the end result of this statistical analysis. Basically, it's this simple. If I have a quarter, for instance, and I flip a quarter, Jerry, heads or tails? It's heads, okay? If I flip a quarter again, it's tails. I ought to stop there, shouldn't I, for my illustration? It's tails. Let's try again. It's tails. 3 out of 4 were tails. But you know what statistical analysis will tell you? If you flip that enough times, 50% of the time it's going to be heads, 50% of the time it's going to be tails. We didn't get a large enough sampling, right? So we ended up with 3 of them as tails and 1 of them as heads. So there was a guy that took the prophecies of Christ. His name is Dr. Stoner. And he said that for somebody to have fulfilled just 8 of these prophecies, just 8 of them, not 64 of them, 8 of them, and they not be the Son of God, is the equivalent of covering the entire state of Texas. You know the state of Texas is a very big state. It's like covering the entire state of Texas 2 feet deep with silver dollars, marking 1 silver dollar, blindfolding a man, letting him go anywhere in the state of Texas. He reaches down and he picks up the 1 with the X on it. That's the odds of somebody fulfilling just 8 of these prophecies and they not be the Son of God. And there's a number for that. It's called 1 in 100 quadrillion. That are the odds that somebody could have fulfilled these prophecies, 8 of these prophecies, and they not be the Son of God. What would the number be if it were 64 prophecies? The number would be staggering. Who could it be? The reality is Jesus is the Messiah. Now, through this series, I've talked about the journey of man. I did that kind of multifaceted. I did that from a standpoint of mankind, the man, Jesus Christ. Looked at the flood, Noah, and the history of man, the Jewish people as we track the history even of Jesus Christ coming. This sermon specifically today is prophesying the man, Jesus Christ, and that's going to lead us into our next study ultimately in this series. But I want you to recognize how important it is for you to be honest and to look at the evidences of who the Messiah is. And then it becomes a lot easier to believe in a virgin birth, a miraculous virgin birth, and believe in the miracles and believe in a resurrected Christ when you look at the evidences that have been presented for us over hundreds of years, and prophecies have been given to us over hundreds of years. Do you believe Jesus is Messiah? Do you believe he's your Savior? Do you believe he is the Christ? He can save you from your sins. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. You need to have the right relationship with Jesus. If the church can help you with that, either in being baptized into Christ or to find reconciliation and communion and fellowship again with the church. Maybe you've separated yourself from the church and you need to find communion and fellowship again. You need to make a decision today through repentance and prayer to come back to the Lord. We love you here. We care about you and would pray for whatever decision you need to make this morning from a spiritual standpoint. The church is here to assist you. And won't you come while we stand and sing this song that's been selected?